Hi everyone. I think I'll get started now because it looks like most people are in that we're expecting. So welcome and thank you for taking a bit of time off this morning to listen to me talk, but also hopefully to engage in some questions as well. So I hope you're all in the right place and you're expecting to hear a little bit about anxiety this morning and how to cope with anxiety. I just want to introduce myself before we get started. So my name is Dr. Catherine Frogley. I'm a clinical psychologist originally from the UK, but I work at the LightHouse Arabia alongside lots of lovely other psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about anxiety. You'll see that the talk is positioned in the context that we're facing right now in terms of COVID and this pandemic that we're experiencing. So a lot of the examples are around that. However, this talk is using a lot of examples and a lot of strategies that can be used for any form of anxiety. And I will say that all of the strategies that we teach you in this webinar are tried and tested by myself and my clients that I work with, because we all experience anxiety, and I will talk through what I mean by that as we go through today. So that is me. I just want to do some little housekeeping points. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there are a couple of different things that you can do to engage in today's session. So first of all, I just would like to check that you can hear me and you can see me clearly. So if you can just raise your hand. If a few of you can do that, excellent. Okay, so I'm clear, which is good. You'll also see there's a Q&A function at the bottom as well. Now, as soon as I share my screen with you, unfortunately, I'm not able to see you raising your hand or the chat, the questions that you have as we go through the talk. So what I like to do is go through the content, but I will leave 10 minutes at the end for us to answer questions around anything that I've said. So just bear with me whilst I go through it. Please add any questions in there. I often find it's better to wait until the end and add your questions in there at the end, because it may be that I answer your question as I go through the talk. So just kind of write them on a piece of paper near you and pop it in at the end, just so that we can get to the ones that really matter and haven't been perhaps addressed during the talk. Okay, I think that's all from me. The only other thing I'll say is that we will be sending the recording of this webinar to you in an email later, and we will also send a handout which has the images and the things that you see in the slides on it. So you will have access to this content afterwards as well. Okay, so let me just share my screen with you all now, and let's get into the content as I said today. So there we go, it's just loading. So as I said, we're going to be talking today about anxiety. We're going to talk about it in terms of COVID and the pandemic, but I also want you to know that this is for other forms of anxiety too. So for those of you who haven't necessarily heard too much about the LightHouse Arabia, we are a mental health and wellness centre based in central Dubai. We have lots of lovely clinicians from all over the world. A large amount of us are psychologists, but we do also have psychiatry, occupational therapy, and speech and language therapy. We offer lots and lots of different services. I'm not going to go into too much detail about them here, but if you are interested to learn of any community services we offer, any free or low-cost services or therapy, please do check out our website or our Instagram page, which is at LightHouse Arabia. I will leave the screen at the end up at the end if you want to write that down. Okay, here are some of the lovely people I work with. As I said, we're a large bunch and we're from all over the world, so you can see that in this picture. So let's think a little bit about what our learning objectives are for today. So we want, first of all, to understand what we're talking about. We want to know, what do we mean by anxiety? How does it present in the brain and the body? And taking that knowledge, how do we then learn ways to cope with or confront the anxiety that we're all facing in one way or another right now? And as I go into this, I think that's important to keep in mind, that for all of us, we're experiencing some level of uncertainty, some level of anxiety, which is running as an undercurrent in our lives right now for everyone. But I think for some, it's filling up their, I like to call it a stress bucket, more than others. So our tolerance and our ability to cope with that anxiety is up and down based on the other things that we might be dealing with. Okay, so let's first of all understand what it is that we're trying to confront, why we have anxiety, what it does for us, what it doesn't do for us, and how it affects us in our mind and our bodies. Okay, so let's do a little bit of an anxiety 101. So the very first thing to say, and probably the most important thing to say, that I share with all my clients is we all have anxiety. Everyone has anxiety. I have anxiety, you have anxiety, my parents have anxiety, my sister has anxiety, my friends have anxiety. Everyone experiences anxiety. And the second thing to say is that we should never, ever attempt to get rid of anxiety completely. And a lot of clients will come in and they will say, you know, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety at the moment, I don't want to feel that anxiety. And actually, often it's not about ridding ourselves of anxiety, because anxiety tells us what matters. It signals to us that something is not right and that we perhaps need to address something in our lives that's causing that anxiety. It also ensures that we remain safe and that we survive. So at a very basic level, anxiety is the part of us that is alerted to danger, and it is the one that keeps us safe. And often as we go into what happens in the brain, some of these things are triggered, you know, without us even thinking about it automatically. And that is how anxiety works best. But of course, there are things that in the modern day we experience anxiety about that perhaps is disproportionate to the actual threat that we're experiencing. So I always think of anxiety as having two sides to its coin, if you like. So on one side is the anxiety that we feel, but on the other side is a value or something that matters to us. So an example I give at the moment is right now, my mum is supposed to be coming out to visit. And I don't think she's going to be able to. And I'm having lots of anxious thoughts about when am I next going to see her? Am I going to be able to go home at Christmas? Is she okay? You know, lots of thoughts around my mum right now. And if I were to look at the other side of that, it's because family is a value that is very close to me. So because family is something that's very close to me, it means that I'm more likely to be thinking and worrying about these aspects of life. So just looking at the other side and thinking about, well, how can I act in line with the value that I have around family can also be a helpful way to support that anxiety. So having said that, helpful optimal levels of anxiety can turn into clinical levels of anxiety. So if we look at this threshold that we have down the bottom, you'll see that there is a level, and in the middle there is where we want to be, which is the optimal anxiety. So anxiety can drive us to check our work before we send it to our boss, or for me it would be a report that I'm writing for a client. My anxiety drives me to double check everything I've written in that report. So that is me performing at my peak. Now, if I were to be triple, quadruple, you know, spending a lot of time checking my work before I send it off, and it's costing me a lot of time and it's creating a lot of anxiety for me and getting in the way of me doing my job, then this is when it's moved into disordered anxiety, where it's interrupting my ability to get through things. It's making me feel maybe very panicked, very upset, very anxious, or paralyzed. Maybe I'm not doing that report because I know it's going to bring a lot of anxiety for me. This is clinical levels of anxiety. And on the other side of this, if I were not to check my work at all and I was just to send out a report that hadn't had that careful eye to look through it, then this is also unhelpful. This is me being reckless or careless or not taking pride in what I'm doing. So at either end of this spectrum, it's perhaps not helpful. So we want to maintain and we want to be in that middle ground. And if we think of the anxiety related to COVID, that is us abiding by the rules, taking the precautions, washing our hands whenever we need to, but not necessarily over washing our hands or not washing our hands at all. So you can see how when we think about anxiety, we want to manage it and we want to keep it in that middle ground, but we don't want to get rid of it because that would be detrimental to our survival. Okay, so let's think about what happens in the brain. And we often, and you may have heard people talking about the amygdala before. So sometimes we talk about the amygdala hijacking the brain, because this is what it does. So if we think of the brain, in the middle of the brain, there's a little kind of almond-shaped part of it that is called the amygdala. And one of the main functions of the amygdala is it is our threat detection system. So I think of it as like a lifeguard which sits at the top of the brain and is always just scanning the environment to see if there's any signs of danger, if there's anything we need to be alerted to. And if there is some danger or some threat in the environment, the amygdala takes action and it has the power to shut down other parts of the brain. And so the amygdala also does not know the difference between what is an imagined fear in our minds, it's us thinking through the situation in the future, versus what is really happening in the here and now. So we talk about this as fear as opposed to anxiety. So anxiety is often us imagining scenarios in our head which haven't happened yet but make us feel anxious, whereas fear is something that's happening in the environment right now. So the amygdala will detect there is a threat, either imagined or real, and if that threat is big enough, it will then create a cascade of physical symptoms, and it will also switch off the higher cortex. And you'll see here, so the higher cortex is the part of our brain that's responsible for planning, for thinking through decisions, for calming down, for those kind of the rational part of our brain that we like to think we are acting on all the time is held in that higher cortex. Now, when the amygdala says, nope, we have a threat that we need to pay attention to, it switches off some of those abilities and it creates what we call the fight, flight, or freeze response, which triggers us into a survival mode to be able to survive. So when we feel anxious or angry or any kind of big emotion, we may be triggered to either fight against what it is that we're scared of, to flight, to withdraw, to run away, or to freeze, avoid, or just to kind of stay immobile in that situation. And we're going to talk about how that presents in the body as well. So the fight or flight, or sometimes it's called the stress response system, has lots of different impacts on our body. So we know that there is that mind-body link is very, very strong when it comes to emotions. We used to think it was very separate, but we now know that they are always talking to one another. So when the amygdala senses a threat, what it will do is it will say, right, let's trigger the adrenaline and cortisol reaction. So it sends a message to the adrenal glands, they send out adrenaline and cortisol, and some of these things happen. So the first thing that you might notice is that your heart rate will increase. You may feel your heart beating, which is quite an unusual sensation. We don't often notice our heart beating as we go through our day, and that can feel quite scary. And for some, it can feel like I'm about to have a heart attack, even if somebody is experiencing panic. So our heart rate increases to enable us to have more blood in our arms and legs, our vital organs, to kind of get us ready to run, to fight, or to freeze. It momentarily suppresses our immune system. Our blood pressure increases, our digestion stops because we don't have time to be digesting lunch or breakfast when actually we're dealing with a threat. We just need to react. The liver converts glycogen to glucose to give us more energy, and we need more oxygen. So we may be breathing quicker to get more oxygen into our blood that is needed in our arms and legs to get us ready to run, to fight. And that can all make us feel quite funny. It can make us feel quite shaky. Our stomachs might feel strange when that digestion has stopped. We might urgently need to go to the toilet. We might feel a bit dizzy and lightheaded because the blood is kind of being pushed into other areas. So all of it feels really horrible. Never feels nice to be very anxious. It's a horrible feeling, but none of it is dangerous. In fact, the body is designed to trigger anxiety and then return to baseline, trigger anxiety and then return to baseline. So it is designed to be able to trigger this and come back to normality. Now, of course, if there is chronic anxiety or stress symptoms that are ongoing and the body is operating on that level of cortisol and adrenaline frequently, chronically, that can have implications on our health in the long term. So you can see here the reproductive system, digestion, etc., high blood pressure. These things, if they're not triggered and then back down to baseline, triggered and then back down to baseline as they're designed to do, then that can have later difficulties on our health, which is where you might experience kind of burnout, stress-related physical symptoms. But in the short term, this is exactly how our bodies are supposed to respond to threat. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the physical signs and symptoms. So we've talked about the heart, so that can feel like chest pain. We might notice our heart beating. We might blush. Our face might suddenly feel very hot. We might feel a shortness of breath related to that oxygen levels changing. We may feel dizzy. We may experience headaches or sweating. Our stomachs may experience different types of symptoms. We may have a dry throat, or in some people, they may feel like they're going to choke or they're unable to eat something. You may feel nauseous, or you may even vomit or be experiencing difficulties in your stomach. You may also experience muscle pains and aches. So you'll notice that sometimes signs of anxiety can feel like tenseness, a tenseness in their jaw, because you might be holding yourself quite tightly, or you may experience neck pain because when we're tense, when we're full of adrenaline, we kind of hold our bodies in a different way. And often what we can do to kind of get rid of that is try and move our bodies to get that adrenaline back through out of the body. So emotionally, some of the symptoms might be excessive fears and worries. So really thinking lots about the fear or worry that we have. We may feel like our mind is racing, or that there is nothing in there, or we go blank when we're having a conversation. It often, in fact, affects our concentration and our memory. People often report feeling quite forgetful. They may really struggle to make decisions. They may be irritable or angry. Their bucket is kind of full, so anything coming in, they just kind of want to, their reaction is very reactive as opposed to thoughtful and based on what is right or based on their values. There may be an impatience, confusion, feeling this energy or this nervousness in your body. And of course, sleep disturbances or having very vivid dreams can also be a sign of anxiety. Behaviorally, often what anxiety drives us to do is to withdraw or avoid things that cause that anxiety. That can actually make it worse, because then we're not learning that the thing that we're afraid of is perhaps not as scary as it feels. We may experience obsessive or compulsive behavior. We may experience outbursts. We may be distressed in social situations or avoid social situations. Phobic behavior means to kind of avoid the thing that makes us feel very scared. And we may try to cope with anxiety with maladaptive coping strategies like drug, alcohol, gaming can be one, sex addiction can be another one. So we may find ways of coping that actually does not help us in the long term. And in terms of performance, we may experience some difficulties at work in terms of our effectiveness, our impairment of judgment, our ability to perspective take. We become quite narrow-minded when we're very when we're very anxious and we just want to get through the treadmill of things that we need to do, we're not able to kind of stand back and look at the bigger picture, to be creative and innovative. That can be very hard when we're very anxious. And of course, it can have an impact on relationships inside and outside of work. So you may be less likely to collaborate, there may be more conflict, you may be less willing to kind of think about the other person's perspective or ideas, etc. Okay, so really what we want to do, and what these strategies are designed to help you with, is to create a space between that stimulus and that response. So as I said, the amygdala often hijacks our brain and switches off that ability to plan, to be reasonable, to think through, what do I want to do with this information, with this anxiety? So we need to learn ways to just slow down the anxiety reaction and then have that freedom to choose. Because if we don't do that, what we have is a reactive response that is based on the anxiety that we're feeling. It's emotion driven, it's situational, and it might be inconsistent with our values and who we are as a person. Whereas if we can slow down that anxiety fight or flight reaction enough so that we can think about our next move, then what we do is we're making decisions based on values, based on choice, based on a strategy, and hopefully it will be consistent with who we are and who we see ourselves as, who our values are. Okay, so now let's think about, how do we do that? How do we slow down some of this reactive response that the brain is designed to do, to enable us to be able to make those decisions about what we want to do with the anxiety? So the very first thing to do, which is often something that can be quite difficult for people to get their head around, to really believe, and also to practice. This is something that I talk a lot about in my work with clients, but one that I find is particularly hard to do. And I now have, some clients I've been working with for a time who come back to me and say, I opened up to this feeling, I'm really aware and I'm comfortable with my feelings now. And that to me that's when I know I've done my job well, because I think that's wonderful. So the idea is that we, instead of distracting, avoiding, pushing away uncomfortable feelings, which is what society has often taught us to do, just in small ways in which, we might tell a child, oh, don't cry, it will be okay. What we're doing is, don't be sad, don't express that sadness. And as innocent as that may be, and that is often the intention, is not to do that, but that is how we have been treated often in our families. It's how we are expecting others around us to be. And we put a lot of energy into not feeling. And we are, as a society, often emotion phobic. We have this expectation or this belief that every decision we make should be based on rational cognition, when in actual fact, we need our emotions to guide us. We need to understand the message that they bring. And what you resist will persist. So if we ignore anxiety, if we ignore anger, if we ignore any of these uncomfortable feelings, they will persist. They will show up in different ways, and they will get louder. They will show up in your body. They'll show up in lots of different ways. So you cannot ignore them. So what we want to do is just be able to accept those feelings and allow them to be there, experience them, let them wash over us, and then we move on with our day, and not letting them build until they become this bigger explosion later on. So there is lots of research that says if we really just sit with that feeling that comes from a single thought or a single trigger, really that emotional reaction in our body, that feeling that we experience, will only last 90 seconds, which is crazy, isn't it? 90 seconds, that's really not long. It's a minute and a half. But what happens often is we experience that. So to use my example of my mum, what if I can't see her for a long time? Then I might feel that feeling, and then I might have, well, what if this, what if that, and the thoughts get hooked and the feeling persists. Okay, so what we want to try and do is actually just sit with that 90 seconds of that feeling and just let it wash over us. And something we try and remember is soft front. So soften your front, but hold your back strong. And imagine that feeling washing over you and just letting it be there, but holding your back as a way to say, I can cope with this feeling. Okay, so emotions are energy in motion. This is where the word comes from. So we just need to let that energy be there, let it wash over us, and then we move on to the next thing. And if we notice our thoughts are coming in, we can acknowledge them and we can say, okay, there is another thought there, there is another thought there. I'm just going to sit with this feeling that I'm having. There's a really lovely longer video on Dr. Salaha Afridi's Instagram talking a bit more about this concept of the soft front and the strong back. And I would really encourage you to go and have a look at this. It's about 6 or 7 minutes long, but it's really, she so beautifully explains what we mean by this. And so if you want a bit more information about it, I would urge you to go and have a look at what she says. Okay, so the first thing is being open and willing to experience the feelings that you have. The other thing is to know your triggers, to understand who or what triggers you and creates more anxiety, because energy flows where attention goes. So if you know that when you're with certain people or when you're in a certain situation, it causes your anxiety or whatever feeling it may be that you're experiencing to increase, then be careful about the time that you spend in that environment or with that person, because emotions are contagious. And so if you are with people in your life, there may be people in your family or friends who are very anxious, who do experience a lot of these things, and that causes you to feel anxious, then you might need to think about, how do I set some boundaries, or how do I look after myself in this situation? So it might be that it's a mum or a dad, and that can be very hard. It doesn't mean you have to cut them out of your life completely, but it might be that maybe you have to find a way to look after yourself and say, you know, today I'm not feeling in a good place, so maybe I'll just send them a message and speak to them tomorrow when I'm feeling a bit better. So set clear boundaries with people. Another important concept to think about is observe, but don't absorb. So sometimes when we're with or around people who have high levels of anxiety, and that may be causing us to feel anxious, if we can imagine that we are an investigator or some sort of experimenter, you could even imagine wearing a white coat, having a clipboard, and just being an observer of what they are doing, and just kind of in your mind notice, okay, they're doing this, they're saying this, they're doing this, as opposed to absorbing it all and feeling everything that they're feeling. If we can absorb and take that distance, then it's going to affect you less. And sometimes with certain people in our life, we may have to employ this particular situation. I think importantly as well is knowing how you're responding to your anxiety. So I noticed, particularly in the very beginning, I was spending a lot of time looking at the news articles. Lots of people were sending lots of information to me, and every time I was doing that, I was feeling more anxious. So I decided to make a decision I used to come down in the morning and put the news straight on. And I haven't done that now for months, because I know that started my day off with this anxiety and this weight that wasn't helping me. So I stay informed, I check the news when I need to, but I don't have it all the time. So just be mindful of what you do that creates more anxiety for you, and how do we limit or set boundaries around that. Okay. So the other thing that's really important, there's lots of research in this area at the moment, which is really exciting to see as a psychologist. So I talked about the mind-body connection, and you may have heard, or maybe you haven't, but there is a lot of research now looking at something called the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that runs from our brain directly to all of our vital organs. And we think of this as like a motorway that's sending messages from the body up to the brain, from the brain down to the body all the time. So we can no longer separate mental and physical health. They are intertwined. They are talking to each other all day, every day. Now, importantly, what we can do to our advantage is we can stimulate the vagus nerve to switch off our fight and flight system, because this is the nerve through which that fight or flight system is created. So what we can do is we can stimulate the vagus nerve, which will then switch on rest and digest, which is our calm baseline that we want to achieve. And we can do this in a variety of different ways, which again are very fascinating to me. So one that's actually not on here is breathing, and you may have heard about breathing and heard about the benefits that can come from slowing your breath, particularly when you feel anxious and your natural response is to breathe quicker. If we can slow it down, we're sending a signal from the body to the brain that we're safe in the environment that we're in. We can also expose ourselves to cold. So a really great way to do this is to hold ice packs, is to, if you can, kind of put it on this top part of your brain. There's a really great technique, which people don't always want to do, but it's to put your face into cold water, hold your breath, and this can trigger a relaxation experience for you. We call it the dive response. We can hum, we can sing, and we can practice meditation. So these are ways in which we indirectly stimulate the vagus nerve, which then in turn switches on rest and digest and stops that fight or flight system from being active in the body. I think the exposure to cold is something that I do myself. I see others doing. It really works. It can be a cold shower, a cold drink, holding ice cubes, putting it on our face. It really, really does help. So that in particular, but humming, singing, meditation, these can also be very helpful too. Grounding yourself is such a beautiful way to also send that signal from the body to the brain that we are in a safe environment. Because what happens is when we're anxious, we're often imagining something in our mind that feels unsafe. So for me, it's me not seeing my mum until God knows when. Now, if I am to focus on where am I right now, to ground myself in this moment, this particular situation, I am safe. Nothing bad is in the environment. I'm in my office, I'm at work, I'm delivering this webinar to you. I can feel my desk, I've got my water, etc. Everything is safe. So I can take myself away from that feeling, and I can remind my body and send that message from the body up to the brain that I am safe. So we can do this in lots of different ways. We can do it as simply as what I just said, which is to say, my name is Catherine Frogley, I'm in my office, I'm delivering a webinar. We can just notice where we are and remind ourselves of that. We can look at the 5 senses, so we can look at what can I see, what can I hear, what can I touch, what can I smell, what can I taste. Or we can bring about particular senses. We can take a short walk and notice, how does my body feel as I walk? What kind of smells? What can I see? We can create, we can smell aromatherapy oils. We can have a bath. All we're doing really is just trying to orient ourselves to the here and now. And sometimes I create like a self-soothing bag with 5 senses, different objects for those 5 senses, which might include some oils, some chewing gum or some mints, something squeezy to kind of squish and feel, a picture of something that brings back a positive memory, etc. Okay. Now, if you are experiencing or have experienced or know someone who has experienced a panic attack, which is those symptoms of anxiety really hitting you very suddenly, feeling very overwhelming, then some things you can do to support you or that person is firstly to know the signs, to understand what those early warning signs might be and how to cope with them. You can offer some comforting self-talk. So often, because it feels so scary to experience a panic attack, we want to remind ourselves, I know what this is. This is not dangerous. I can't die from it. It's not dangerous to me. I'm safe, and this feeling will pass. And if we can, we want to also do some breathing. We want to slow and regulate our breathing, because often what's happening is there is an imbalance between our oxygen and CO2 levels because we're breathing quicker. And we want to rebalance the oxygen and carbon dioxide in our body. So if we can, a really good one to do is to breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and breathe out for 8. 4, 7, 7, 8. 4, 7, 8, like this. And we just want to just really slow that down. Sometimes that feels like it's too hard to hold, or it's too hard to breathe that slowly when you're having a panic attack. So in that case, just try and slow it by a fraction. Whatever you can do, you just want to slow it down. And if you can, the most important bit is slowing the out breath down. Okay, that is the bit that triggers to the brain, we're safe, because we're slowing our breathing down. And that will in turn stop the other things happening. Okay, and in terms of, I'm just going to check how I'm doing for time. My phone has died. Okay. So in terms of other ways to soothe the body, the mind, the soul, there are some other things we can do. So be kind to your body. So as I said, the body and the mind are connected. So if we're not looking after the body, we can't expect the mind to feel well. And similarly, if the mind is not well, then we cannot expect our bodies to feel good. So some things for the body. I say this, I just realized I've got caffeine next to me, but we want to limit caffeine intake. If you are experiencing anxiety, then caffeine triggers a very similar physiological response in our body, which can exacerbate those symptoms of anxiety. So try and limit your caffeine intake if you're feeling anxious. Drink something like chamomile tea, which can be very soothing, very relaxing for the body. I have so much to say about sleep, but I'm not going to say it here. I'm going to just tell you that sleep is so important for you, that if we are trying to work on anything else, but sleep is not good, I will stop the session that I'm doing and I will say we need to focus on sleep first, because it is essential that you get good sleep. And I know anxiety disrupts it. So we need to set boundaries around our phone, the environment that we sleep in, how we prioritize getting good sleep first before we do anything else. Exercise is also a really important part of being a human, and moving our bodies and having some exercise, getting our heart moving, pumping rather, is going to be really important as well for our overall health. That will also in turn help our anxiety. And of course, nutrition and diet is also very important. So keeping an eye on what you're eating and ensuring that, of course, allow yourself treats every now and again, but be sure that your diet is nutritious and you're feeding yourself that nutrition and you're nurturing and looking after yourself. In terms of your mind, we want to be kind about how we speak to ourselves, particularly when we're feeling very anxious. And I am such an advocate for self-compassion, because I really see for myself and for clients, although it can feel very strange initially to talk about ourselves or talk to ourselves in a kind way, it is so important that we do, because what we say to ourselves really matters. So things like, this is going to pass, I'm safe, I'm doing the best that I can with what I've got right now, it's okay that I'm experiencing some anxiety, this is a very stressful situation. Those statements can be incredibly powerful. So please do go away and think about, how do I talk to myself? Stilling yourself, and I have to do this. When I notice that my brain is firing off all angles, I can feel an energy in my body, I know that that's the time where I need to still, to calm myself, to take a break from what I'm doing and just sit and be still for a while. And in terms of your soul, so think about the things that you do that engage your spirit. So it could be religion, or it could be spiritual practice, or it could be meditation, it could be creativity, or being playful. And I think sometimes we really forget about this last one, especially when we're anxious. We don't allow ourselves the opportunity to be playful when we're anxious. It's one of the first things that goes. But it's so important that we do, because that playfulness creates flexibility, it allows us to be creative, it allows us to have innovative thought. So playfulness, creativity, spirituality, think about these areas and think about, how do I make space for this? Okay, so how we talk about emotions is also really very important. So if we can, alongside the willingness and the acceptance, if we can be curious and compassionate towards our feelings, And if we can, better yet, label them, it's going to help us to cope with those feelings too. So often, or rather, there's been lots of research that says, when we look at people's brains who are experiencing a particular emotion, the amygdala, that fight or flight threat detection system, the activity in that area of the brain reduces when people name their feelings, which I just think is fascinating. So if we can get very specific, very careful about naming, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling angry, I'm upset today, I'm feeling tired today, whatever it is, if we can name it, we're going to create an understanding around it, which feels it's much better for us then to know, how do we deal with that? Okay. Observing your thoughts can also be really powerful. So if we can create distance between ourselves and what we're thinking, because we are not our thoughts, and our thoughts are not necessarily facts. You know, thoughts are not facts. They are just thoughts. They're just internal phenomenon that happen in our brains. So if we can create distance by putting at the front of that, I am having the thought that, what if my mum cannot visit me until 2021? Or I'm having the thought that, what if everyone in my peer group is smarter than me? Or I'm having the thought that, what if the client isn't satisfied with my work, etc. So creating that distance can be really important to just take some space away from the thought. Another technique is to speak about yourself in the third person. So again, this tricks the mind into creating some distance between you and the thought, and it's almost like you're talking about somebody else. So Catherine is very stressed today. She wishes she could go to the gym or go to the cinema. That in itself, you're acknowledging how you feel, but you're giving yourself a little bit of distance to reduce that activity in the amygdala. Okay, now the very last strategy I'm going to talk about today is distraction. And as if you recall at the very beginning, I said we spend so much energy trying not to feel, trying to distract, push away our feelings. And actually, you know, this has to be the last resort, because if we continue to do that with every feeling, it's going to pop up somewhere else. However, of course, there are times when we cannot experience anxiety because we're in the middle of a meeting, or we cannot open up to anger because we're sat with the children, or whatever it is. So there may be times when we just need to distract, or these other things are not working for whatever reason. And so some ways to do that is to have a game on your phone, which is timed, so there is an endpoint, to change your physical environment, to shift activities, to focus on something that you really enjoy, can also be a really good way just to be mindful, to take your brain away from what it's going through, what it's thinking about, just to shift you into a different gear, to reduce that activity in the amygdala and come back to it. So it's always the last thing, but it can also be a beneficial thing if and when we need to use it. Okay, that is all from me. I think I've done not too bad in terms of time. I've whizzed through those things, so I've got some time for questions. I'm just going to leave this up for a moment. So as I mentioned, we have the LightHouse Arabia Instagram account, which has lots of lovely resources from all of the clinicians that we work with on there. But we also have Dr. Salaha Afridi, who is the managing director here at the LightHouse and the founder, one of two. She has a wonderful Instagram account which has lots of videos, lots of self-help kind of snippets and resources there. So please do take a look. And the video I mentioned about strong, soft front, strong back, it's a really lovely video. She's got lots of others on there, but that is something that I think she describes really, really well. So I would urge you to go and have a look at that, or you can have a look at our website too. Okay, all right, I'm just gonna come off the screen now and just see if there are any questions, anything you wanted further clarification on, anything at all related to this topic, and I will try my best to answer. Can't see any at the moment, which is good. Maybe I explained things well. So someone here has asked, Can anxiety have a long-term effect on our mind or body? So yes, so as I mentioned, anxiety, it's designed, our bodies are designed to have spikes of anxiety. So if we are dealing with anxiety in that optimal level where there's a spike and then it comes back down to baseline every now and again, that is absolutely fine. That is what our bodies are designed to do. There's no harm in that. Now, harm comes when we remain in a high level of anxiety and stress. Then harm comes, because our bodies are not designed to continue to produce cortisol over and over again, or adrenaline. They're not designed to be at that level all the time. So that can have lots of different physical health concerns. We can become unwell. It suppresses our immune system. It can even have an impact on our reproductive system. So there are lots of health conditions that can come from chronic stress. And what I mean by that is when we're feeling chronically anxious, clinical levels of anxiety for a long period of time, then yes, that is going to have a health implication on our bodies. But in general, having anxiety that spikes and comes back down, as it should in everyone, that is fine. That is safe. That's what our bodies are designed to do. So I hope that answers your question. So someone has asked, are there any self-help books you would recommend? Yes, I'm just going to see if I've got any in my office right now. I actually think I've taken them. I have 2 offices at the moment, one here and one at home. And I think the one I'm thinking of is at home. But yes, there are lots of lovely books. So there is a series, it's called the Overcoming series, which has lots of a book for every difficulty, essentially. So there is Overcoming Anxiety, there's Overcoming Generalized Anxiety Disorder, there's Overcoming Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, there's Overcoming Binge Eating. I have that one here, I think. So it's a series, and if you just type that into Amazon, they have the experts in the field for the specific areas that they do, and there is some really great resources in there. You can also there are also lots of self-help books about cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety that you can also access. So anything that's based on the cognitive behavioral therapy model is probably going to be quite good. There's Mind Over Matter, I think that's the name of it. That's also a really good resource as well. So yes, absolutely, lots of lovely self-help books. Another book I really like about feelings in general, which is not a self-help book per se, but it helps you to redefine how you view feelings, is a book called Permission to Feel by Dr. Mark Brackett, which is a fantastic book. I've really enjoyed reading that. I'm recommending it to everyone. That's a great book. Another book that I really love at the moment is Lost Connections, which is more about depression and how we become disconnected in the world from people, from our environment, from our values, etc. That's a really lovely book as well that I've recommended to a lot of people. There's anxiety in there, but it's also about feeling a little bit depressed, or feeling, that we're not acting in line with what is important to us. So I hope that answers your question too. Okay, well, guys, I don't seem to have any other questions here, so I'm gonna say goodbye for now. It's been lovely to spend some time with you this morning. I hope you found it very helpful. And please do have a look at if you have Instagram, look at our Instagram pages, or if you just want to check out our website. We are developing these platforms as where we put a lot of resources as well. So please check them out if you want more information. And also know that we'd be very happy to come back and do more talks on topics that resonate with you. So we have a full talk on sleep, for example. We have talks on mastering stress and burnout. So just get in touch if there is something that you want to deep dive on a little bit more. All right, well, thank you so much for all your support today. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.